Well, good day, shipmates. You hear that rumbling? That's the sound of the rain ending. Well, we hope, but that's just the nature of the climate around here. And you know, when you have a warm, hot, sunny day, all the dogs go crazy and bark at that thing in the sky. Or the other story is you have visitors onto this part of the inner passage, and it's been raining all week, and so they go ashore and they ask a little local kid, "How long has it been raining in your town?" And the kid says, "How should I know? I'm only 8 years old." So I hope you had a good time anyway and got so wet you feel almost part Alaskan at this point. But today I'm going to talk about the native peoples, and I have to qualify that I'm neither native nor a scholar nor even a resident here, but I've been coming here for so many years. I've always find interest and inspiration in a lot of the local native culture. And you could see this even yesterday in Wrangell. We saw some of the Tlingit people, and they were speaking in their own language, and then they would say hello in English, but they still have a living culture. So this is an area, like many indigenous peoples all around the world, where modernism, progress, industrialization, boats, engines, internet, all this stuff has come in and layered over a still active native culture, which has been in many places lost, and the whole population of the Alaskan natives, like much of all the Americas from the Arctic down to Patagonia, have had incursions and wars and disease, but they're estimated about 5 to 10% of their original pre-contact population. And so I'm going to just show you some of the that are around Alaska, and this is a variety of people who actually may have heard about each other. They were never a unified nation. So there are all these major groups and subgroups who are all living in considerable distance from each other. Maybe they had trade relations, and they may have had other contact before the invasion of the Russians and the rest of the world up here. But they are still in their native territory, and a lot of that right to their own land has been restored recently. So this is just the variety of the people. We're down in the southeast corner where we have shore people, also out to the Aleutians. They're the pink, the Aleut, and then the Yupik, and on the far Arctic you have the Inuit, who have many groups stretching all the way over to actually Norway and Lapland, all of Siberia. But in general, there have been historically called either Eskimos, which is a name that none of them ever used for themselves. It was sort of pejorative from some other native group, but Aleut, Inupiaq, Yupik, and then there's similar people over in Siberia. And then the Indians were mostly the lowlanders who were not on the ice, let's say, like the inland people called Athabaskan, and then we are in the Tlingit area, which just south of us, we pass the Haida, the Tsimshian, and the Ayak area up in the Gulf of Alaska. But these are all people who live right on the shore, except for the Athabaskans who are on the river systems. But they all came over, we think, from Siberia. The DNA analysis has linked them to a couple of key groups in prehistoric Siberia. Then they came and merged and became distinctively Native Americans, and the DNA haplogroup goes all the way down to South America that shows that there was some complicated migration, but up here is either over the land bridge or by canoes and watercraft all along the coast, even past the great ice fields that covered most of North America back when they were in motion, let's say 10 to 15, 20,000 years ago. But the oldest native site in all of North and South America is actually in Montes, southern Chile, which confounded the archaeologists. They thought the oldest sites would be up here, but actually the oldest ones have been found elsewhere, from New Mexico down to Chile, and so they're still finding things. And just yesterday we went to the petroglyph beach at Wrangell, and this is a most interesting site because it's petroglyphs that are carved onto rocks on a rocky shore that gets covered with tides and seaweed, and is not exactly a ceremonial place, but this may be the remains of the first landings of the first native Alaskans, who often would mark their territory with a petroglyph. Now, they had no iron, and they were Stone Age people back then. They don't know that. It's very hard to estimate the time, but these designs have been there, and they predate the current Tlingit culture. They say those were just our ancestors. We don't know who actually did it. And they've put a few up in a few reproductions to sort of give you the iconography, and this has gone on into the contemporary native art. Here's probably an orca, and other ones have these abstract whirlpool. This may be a symbol of the water spirits or something nobody knows. There's no written record. And others are animals or faces. This one is the ovoid eye, the eye of a whale or some sea creature that's looking from underwater at you or is reflected in the water. And here's a face. Again, we know so little about them, but there are hundreds of them in this site, and many other sites in Alaska have been found. But this is so accessible, it's a very famous one. John Muir came and described it 1870s originally. Well, this whole region where we are, this what they call the Northwest Mediterranean, all these islands and straits and calm waters near the ocean, but it created a great ecosystem where all these people settled in, and they have been here for as long as they can remember, which goes back thousands of years. Now, the names that we may know that are still here, the Chinook and the Makah, and there's some of these people are still there. The Nootka, the Chimchimian, and then further up the coast where we're going, we get the Haida on that island. We went on the inside passage right there, and then now we've been up in Tlingit land, which is actually the largest of the groups, about 70,000 members at this point, all through from Juneau and up into the ice fields and then down to here. But above all these people living on the shore were maritime, water-oriented cultures. They did not have settlements high in the mountains. Other people up there they traded with, but they were all settled around the shore, and they were master of builders and handling of canoes. And these are the red cedar canoes, which they're still making, but without the canoe, they couldn't go to the islands to go fishing, have a community spread around. So every house had a few, and some of them are very large. This is sort of like the domestic one that you just go off and go fishing for the day, other than larger cargo canoes or war canoes. And so this whole life along the shore was particularly bountiful. As they say, when the tide goes out, the table is set for dinner, because you just go out and gather all the mussels you wanted. There was plenty of bird life, plenty of fish life. And so they did not have the problems of the northern natives who had to fight the winter and the cold and store up food like most people are used to. This was a very easy and gentle place that led to a very elaborate culture, because they would they'd work some in the winter and maybe go hunting and trading, and then in the summer, and then in the winter they'd stay home in their clan houses, and they were most famous for having exuberant activity of arts and crafts and weavings and carvings and all this stuff. So they would accumulate all these things that they're still doing it, and you can see them in the shop sort of as a reminder of this whole culture that was very productive in a sense. Then they would trade up the hills with mountain goat, basketry. They'd send up seal oil and fish oil up into the mountains and trade for stones or sometimes blankets, elk meat. And so there was a uphill, downhill commerce, and over these trails they would carry from the shore the herring oil that was taken out of the small fish that were innumerable in here, and they would dry them up, and then they would put them in a backpack and carry them, and that was a trade item that would go deep inland across the central continent. And then they would bring back all kinds of other things for the local culture here on the seashore. Now, these are very old and unique pictures of some of the trading and ceremonial vessels that plied these islands when the first contact was made. And of course, this was a couple of hundred years later when there were photographs. But this was a very vibrant and expressive culture. They would have ceremonial visits. They'd all get dressed in these fantastic robes. They had potlatch ceremonies. I'll talk a bit more about that. And so when the first Captain Cook, and then the Spanish, and then the Russians, and the Americans, and everybody came in here. They were amazed how nimble these people were in their boats. They traveled, 1,000 miles paddling, and this is unusual because they didn't have sails until the European vessels came in, which they call white ravens or white clouds coming toward, and then they adapted it to their own use, and suddenly they didn't have to paddle so much anymore. Well, that may be a good thing. I'm both a paddler and a sailor, but the paddle became a cultural icon of each clan, and everybody had to carve their very own one and name it, talk to it, be with it, and they have some preserved in the museum. This is the museum in Sitka right here, if you saw that. But you can see even in Juneau, they still make them, and this is the pride of a carver and a family. They'll put their own totemic clan and other symbology, and then they'll put abalone in it. So these paddles, which are not meant to go in a boat or get wet, often cost thousands of dollars because they are object of sort of veneration of that tradition. And so the boats were sometimes very big. If you saw in Sitka where the bus was, there was one of the long boats for the clan, which was probably 40 feet long, almost this size, where they'd carry dozens of people, often for trading, or else there was warfare. There was inter-clan and then trans-tribal warfare occasionally, often over more honor and pride than, let's say, resources. As one of the chieftains said, why should we fight when we all have enough to eat? We have plenty of wood, we have plenty of sky, we have plenty of sea. Why are we fighting? Well, that's a basic human question. Often it's over pride. I wouldn't know about that in modern politics. But anyway, this is one of the old war clubs, and they would take revenge, they would take slaves, they would have a all too human variety. In this illustration back in the early 1700s, here's one group carrying the heads of their enemy. And a lot of this is, gratuitous warfare, perhaps, but there has been no major conflicts up in these areas other than traffic jams in downtown Sitka. They fight over that one stop sign these days. But it's generally a very amiable and a pleasant place. I'm a native of New Mexico, where there's a lot of angry people. I think it's the sunshine that does it to them. But up here, they're pretty amiable all the time. And this is the heritage of this lifestyle on the shore, easy pickings, weather's not so bad, never snows, you don't have to shovel your walk or put your canoe up for the winter. And they would build these houses out of red cedar, which is a very well-preserved wood, lasts up to 100 years. And so this is the style, big logs, and they would do this all with stone hatchets, though. This was tremendous effort. And we saw the clan house of Chief Shakes in Wrangell yesterday, and it's all chipped so carefully. I mean, hand chipped every board, probably with a modern tool. I mean, the outside world brought in iron and all kinds of things that changed their life. But back in the previous lifestyle, they would sit and, for years, make a totem pole. And these are the famous iconic feature up here. They were not a matter of worship, they're more memorial or identity. And so if you went to the park in Sitka, they still have some of them if the bears haven't taken them away, because I understand the closed part of the park because there are too many bears. Well, the bears ought to get their own totem poles, that's what I say. Anyway, these villages along the shore were, again, kind of ceremonial face. There'd be the clan symbol. I believe this is owl. And then you have the ovoid eyes, and then you have the very small entrance where the one version of why is there such a small door, and one is so you're humble when you come home, and you bow to everybody as you come into the house. But it's also good to close the door and people can't get at you like the bears. Anyway, they keep building these, and now they have modern roofs, but they often have the same iconograph. This one again is a bear, and they are still making totem poles. The center of the house was always the communal place around a fire, and there was a little top ventilation on all these buildings. But they would sit around all winter, and they would dry out their herring. You see this on the ceiling, and they would have all of their robes and everything, and they'd sleep around the fire, and everything was stored on the wall. So this is actually a drawing from Captain Cook's expedition up here. And so it made for a very cozy winter lifestyle, I'd say. Everybody's in the same big room. Everybody hopefully gets along. They're not isolated in separate buildings or apartments. Well, this was such a surprise to the Europeans. They found this most amiable and friendly and welcoming people, unlike other people that had been encountered and fought back around the world. But much of it is had kind of almost evaporated over the contact time, and many languages were lost. As one elder was quoted, "No young people care about us anymore, or our language, or our mythology," and they take 3 generations to forget the whole thing. And so the anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss wrote about this area. He said, "It's a stage along whose entire stretch the actors of a play for which we do not have a script have but left their footprints." Well, that was back 50 more years ago. Now there's a revival of the native cultures and some of the ceremonies that have come sort of miraculously out of somebody's memory, and the populations have reestablished their pride and some of their traditions. But when you look back at how they were dressed in the ceremonies, they don't do it this way anymore. They're driving around in a truck and working in fishing, and they're sort of assimilated. But these are burial buildings up in the mountains above some of the inner passage where they would carve effigies of the deceased. There was no preservation of a body. It would quickly be interred and go away, but they would carve out a memorial, and then they would also put either a symbol or a memory on their totem poles. So again, this was a elaborate culture. These were not per se a religion, other than the general, let's say, mix with all of the nature and geography. As someone said, if nature has a sacred order, it must be respected. Otherwise, survival becomes unlikely. And so there's a great deal of symbology and tales that are sort of mixed into history. We don't know what's true or not. For instance, there's a story that's sort of like the Noah's Ark, where the tremendous tsunami came, and the only people who survived were the ones who planned ahead, and they had their canoe on top of the mountaintop, came back down and settled. And it probably happened, just like Noah. But meanwhile, when the incursions happened and they got iron tools, then tourism, and then the gold rushes, and suddenly people are up here, they started making very elaborate and often meaningless sculptures. But this is one I found, which is off of Haida Island, off BC coast, which is the only one that has this sort of flaming sun at the base of the totem pole. And this may refer to one local legend that they escaped a volcano that cut a hole through a glacier, and then they all ran through the ice cave and came down to the shore, and then found it heaven on earth, living in Sitka, or wherever this was. I mean, there are 10,000 islands and probably even more tales about how it all started. But they've rebuilt some of these villages in the original way. I mean, most of them have a house with electricity and plumbing, and they're online right now, but they still keep a clan house. This is in Ketchikan, Saxman. And so this has the traditional guardian of the clan house on the 4 posts. And then every totem pole can be red. There's usually an eagle or a thunderbird, the most powerful of birds in the mythology, not an actual bird. Then the clan and what they call a moitié symbology, which the family line is passed down through the women, and then they make matches with other clans, and then every clan marries out of their clan, so they keep the biological diversity, and it's often reflected in these poles. So here you have a thunderbird, and then I'm not sure who the 3 figures are. Sometimes they will depict even visitors that come and see them. Here's a thunderbird with a person, and then I think that's a raven underneath it. So everyone's a little different. They're making up new ones. For instance, when Seward bought his folly and Alaska was joined as a U.S. territory, they did a memorial to President Lincoln, because he was now the big chief on top of the Thunderbird. And here's another one, which is considered to be the totem of envy. because the eagle on top envies the humans who get to live together in a happy group, whereas eagles are very solitary with only their mate, and they throw their kids out. And then the human is envious of the eagle because the eagle flies around and gets to see everything, whereas the humans are just stuck on ground. And then the wolf envies the humans because they have it much easier, and again, they don't have to run in a pack desperately hungry all the time. And so this is a symbol of, human and animal nature. Often it kind of combines so that one animal talks to another one, becomes a human, converts back again into whatever they are. It's sort of like a shape-shifting mythology is often a part of this whole culture. This is the raven, which is the great trickster bird, and one of the clan names. And it is particularly sort of tricky because it can feign things like a broken wing to distract a wolf, or in this case, here's another native tale about how the raven was hungry, so it went down and talked to the orca that had just eaten and made the orca laugh, and so it would fly in the mouth and eat the fish, and then when it was hungry, it would go back, tell another joke, and the whale would open up its mouth for another feast for the raven. And this goes on even to the point where you see these big black kind of stern birds who are very intelligent compared to some humans maybe, that they will recognize you. They can recognize a human face, and if you do them wrong, they will not only come peck at you or steal things from you, they'll tell all the other birds to do it too. So they can pass on information and bear a grudge. They're the only bird that like that. The other thing they'll do is they will be on the trees around town, and when you go to the grocery store and you put your groceries in the back of your pickup truck, they'll sort of follow you along, and at the stop sign they'll come and take whatever they like. And so they're the sort of the iconic, sort of like a trickster, coyote, cocopele. There's a lot of these around the world. Loki, and then they were transformed into big raven masks that are dances. This is a Shimshimian mask group further south, but make big ones with the mask moves, and then it goes into the iconography again with those ovoid eyes, and here's the raven sort of sitting on the heads of some humans. And so this was where, when you had a long dark winter and you had tales to tell, the shamans, the elders would be the entertainment, if nothing else, just to tell you all these things. So there was like a Homeric oratorial memory. And so this is when people came and they wanted to write it down. It was so hard to translate it, much less to believe what they were talking about, but above all to understand the power that these stories had. And so these revered shamans, who were chiefs or male and female, would often get dressed in a ceremonial coat made out of mountain goat fur that was stitched with all of the clan symbols. When the trade started with the outside world, then they started getting buttons, and then they started calling a button jacket. So this was a new fashion back a couple 100, 200 years ago, and you can still see it. They wear that kind of a felt coat with the button work of the imagery. And this is actually in Sitka, the clan house. I don't think it was open because they're all watching the Seahawks game or something like that these days. But this one, in the season when it's warmer and earlier, they will have a big gathering in their brand new modern building where they have the inside in the classical square with a fire in the middle, and then these fantastic carvings. Again, this is the ovoid eye, that sort of like the Turkish eye on the Mediterranean, where it's to ward off all evil spirits. And it carries on to many things, including on my tie. This is one of the cedar storage boxes from one of the clan houses. And again, like hieroglyphics, you can read the imagery, the bear, the frog, the birds, etc., so that you can determine what it's about. And then they would even put it into basketry. So the weaving was a very high art form here. The chieftains in some of the areas wear these sort of conical hats. In this case, they're with the scenery of whaling. So this was what they would do in the winter, or maybe they do it all year round, but they had a lot of time, leisure time to develop such high arts. Here's one of the Nuka chieftains with his chief's hat on it. And when they gather now, they will bring that out and they will wear it still at their meetings. Here's another of the shamans with his sort of handheld totem. And so you sort of take a look in their eyes, but so you're looking back into prehistory with these early photographs of some of the people. And it reminds me of the famous speech of Chief Seattle to the governor of Washington in 1855. He was a Suquamish chief, and he said, "The land does not belong to anyone. We belong to the land. And the red man has ever fled the approach of the white man as morning mist flees the rising sun. Grim fate is on the red man's trail. A few more moons, a few more winters, and not one of the descendants that once moved over this broad land will be left. But why should I mourn the untimely fate of my people? Tribe follows tribe, nation follows nation, as the waves of the sea. It is the order of nature, and regret is useless. In all the earth there is no place dedicated to solitude, but at night when the streets of your cities are deserted, they will throng with the returning hosts of my invisible dead from my tribe, who once filled them and still love this beautiful land. And the white man will never be alone. So let the white man be just and deal kindly with my people, for the dead are not powerless." Dead, did I say? There is no death. There is only a change of worlds. And so this sort of wisdom is sort of still here in these people, and let's say mixed in with all of the contemporary wisdom, if you want to call it that. But a lot of the ceremonies were banned by either the government or, above all, church officials, both the Russian Orthodox and then the missionaries from other groups, and they would come in and face these incantations, shamanistic dances, all this elaborate iconography and things that they just thought was the ultimate paganism. And often a man and a woman together would be the leaders of the ceremonies and have the ceremonial items, and they would speak kind of sacred languages, and they'd carry on myths. And supposedly to this day there are elders of the local people who will still never tell anybody some of the secrets of their people. And so here's some of the old pictures of the shaman on ceremony where they're wearing what is a crown of bear claws. I don't know if the bear agreed with that, but so they would be, let's say, spiritual leaders, and their job, of course, was to heal the sick, talk to the ancestors, predict the future, all the sort of things that we get online now. So you can see the look in their eye. Again, these are, I think, Ansel Adams pictures, or Curtis. This is Curtis' picture. So he got them to be still enough to look in the camera, again, sort of a reflection of an ancient past that we don't know much about. And here's one that is, let's say, getting a little high on his ferns there. They did take psychedelic mushrooms, and who knows what they had before their doctor recommended whiskey. But these things were going on up till the end of the 1800s, and now that they've been permitted again, and these people are more prosperous, they're again having raven dances and making things. We saw in Wrangell yesterday at the hardware shop a ceremonial halibut fish hook, which was all carved and painted, and it was only $450. So these arts are now being appreciated and collected by museums and galleries and even themselves, because many of them are quite prosperous compared to other indigenous people around the Americas. So here's just a few of the iconographic things. They had sort of effigy dolls of the deceased. Then they had elaborate masks. They're most famous for that. That's what Levi Strauss' book was called, The Way of the Mask, and the illusions and the transformations and the possibilities of the theatrical description of all these history and or mythology. So here are some that are now in mostly museums with ermine fur, walrus, whiskers, painted faces. Some of them had multiple faces. Some of them moved around and turned different parts. This looks like an otter with its abalone eyes. Here's a sea monster, Kowunga, that causes turbulence in waters. Some of them were sort of demons, but we're not sure for what, because a lot of them were collected without anybody bothering to, what is this about, because they couldn't communicate. So a lot of this was collected very early, even by the Russians, and much of it is still a mystery. This seems to be a celestial creature or vision of the moon, something. And this one is said possibly because it may be a memorial, because that red streaking may have been a bear that attacked somebody, or warfare got that face. And others are just powerful imagery, sort of as they might have been representing something. We just don't know. And if you go to Anchorage, there's a fantastic museum of all this. The more you look at it, the more variety there are. This is one that had multiple parts, could come apart, and so the story would go on around the fireplace, and the mask would change and the costumes would change. So it was somewhat theatrical, certainly. And so again, when the contact was made, this was not very much appreciated, and a lot of the memory was forgotten. This is one of the earliest drawings of a potlatch ceremony from the Nootka people on Vancouver Island for a visiting Spanish expedition, and they look like they're having a wrestling match there. It must have been a warm day. But we don't know. There's hardly any records of what this really means. And when the potlatch was at its height, when there was more funding for it, let's say there was a fishing industry, timber, and then you had tourism here, the various people would have tremendous big festivals, and they would draw a trainload of visitors. So this is somewhere in Vancouver. But then the tradition is you would make things all winter, and then you would give it away, and you would share everything, and whatever was left over they would actually destroy, because they're going to make some more in the next winter anyway. And so there's a saying of when the chieftain begins the potlatch and the celebration would go on for days, and people would come for hundreds of miles to do this. They would either be the time of the weddings and the alliances or the trading. And so one of the sayings in the Tlingit language to start the potlatch was, pardon my pronunciation, "Au du se ye shu gunai yakwaan," which means, who here is an outsider among us? No one. We're all meant to be here, be welcome, make peace, and everybody is together, wherever you came from. And this was considered a waste of resources by the officials of the national kind that would then say, you can't do this where you just give away stuff, or most famously, they make a bunch of stuff and just burn it. An early version of what's that party called Burning Man, except that they continue to do it. Now it's sort of like having a big Thanksgiving, Christmas party all together, depending on who they are, where they are. Right here in Sitka, the Russian Orthodox Church, the majority of their congregation are Tlingit people, and they have Russian priests speaking in Russian to the Tlingit to this day. But they're polytheistic. They have their own tradition. They have their own sort of animist belief in where they are in the land and the animals and the sea. And so this is very much, as they say, we have an ancient culture, but we live in the present. We are here now. And what are you going to do today? Well, they're teaching a lot of their children their language again. The great scandal of much of North America was they took all of the native children away and didn't allow them to speak their own language. And so now they're getting that education again and reliving some of the mythology and making little theater and even putting up new totem poles. And so this, again, is a fairly vibrant culture. And when we are in Juneau, that is sort of the main clan, Bear Clan of the Tlingit people, and they own most of the shops, real estate, and now they put up funicular up to the mountain, and so they're actually doing quite well. They have the Sea Alaska Corporation, run by the Tlingit Nation, is a major industrial combine for many enterprises in fishing and timbering and different things as they agree to do. Now I'm going to just talk about the inland people, because that's a whole different linguistic group, however, genetically related. They lived on the Yukon and other Stikine River, where we were yesterday, and they'd be up in the plains and they hunted moose, and they would come down and trade with the shore people. But there's still about 80,000 of them spread across Alaska into the Yukon and Canada. And here's just a couple of the elders who have tried to hold on traditions. This woman at age 102 is the last fluent speaker of their language, though. And the youth are often, know a little bit, but it's disappearing and may have been written down, but they're not using it actively like some other areas. But they're most famous because they were hunters. None of these people had agriculture. They were all hunting, gathering, foraging. But the Athabascan were such good hunters, then they became tanners and weavers and especially bead workers when the glass came in. And so this is, you can see that in even the shops in Juneau, there's some beautiful moccasins and leggings and things, leather and fur that are made over the mountains. But out to the sea, the life gets a little more chilly and wet because, again, people are based with sea hunting as their economy. This is the Alutiiq on the Alaskan Peninsula, Kodiak Island. And they were famous for having these very nimble kayaks and going out hunting seal and fish. And they have a characteristic hat, which is made out of cedar, red cedar bark, just to be a visor because they're often out trying to sneak up and catch things. So these, again, are a local craft that is very highly prized, again, with walrus spines and different elements in turquoise, a trade item from somewhere. But they are only a remnant, only a few thousand after some 95% of them died of smallpox and slavery under the Russian fur trade. But they're still represented in the Alaskan community. Then there's the Yupik and the Eskimo Inuit, all the way over to Greenland and again on to Siberia and Norway. Similarly, there's a whole Arctic Council of the northern native peoples now. And this is some of the early contact in the drawings of them. Particularly, they were kind of burnt by the Arctic sun, and they also were noted to take walrus ivory and make what they call lambrets, which were implants in their lips and nose as a sign of knowledge and initiation. But above all, they knew how the kayak, they were the original inventors of the nimble paddled boat, sometimes made out of wood, sometimes out of bone. And so that particular tradition, of course, now become kayaking all over the world. Later, when hunters came up, they would take people out, and these are models that were made locally of bigger ones, and then they made large, either bone or wood, driftwood style to this day. This is up on the north slope, where some of the Inuit are building a new walrus skin bidarka, which is so light you can just pick it up and carry it around over the ice and put it back in. So here's one of them out hunting. They're allowed to hunt for seal and whale, even up there in their native craft, if not on a jet ski. And then the famous igloo is actually not a home, it's a hunting station. So you can spend a week or so up there and hunt on the far ice. Whereas the residence for these people is now mostly in, let's say, prefab or stick construction buildings with heat, electricity, plumbing, but it's often on a muddy tundra, and that's why they have the boardwalks to go around from building to building. My wife, who is a theater director, went and directed a Yupik theater company and lived in the school building here and went all around Alaska one season on tour with these Yupik people. And the Yupik Inuit, whichever they were, this picture shows them they're above all attached to their dogs, and they help them go hunt until modern means. But there's always the husky in the new breed, and of course the kid asks her parent, "Why do the dogs have such an easy life and we have to get dressed?" And the parent said, "I'm sorry, we lost our fur a few thousand years ago. Why did we move north?" But anyway, they survive on mostly a blubber meat diet, no vegetables. I mean, now they import food, but they're incredibly strong and very cheerful people and have had, let's say, some rights returned to them. Their biggest problem now is, of course, the climate change, and the permafrost is causing many of the villages to have to move upland, or else the sea ice is so far away, the animals are too far away. So there's a lot of trouble in the north, even though, let's say, those people have somehow survived much worse, maybe, over the years. Well, I'm going to finish with an Inuit tale about Sedna, the goddess of the sea. And the story begins with a petrel seabird who wants to mingle with the humans and disguises himself as a local Inuit hunter. And you see the glasses that's actually a bone slit glasses so they don't get blinded in the snow. And so the bird becomes a man, goes to the village, and everybody sees it as a man, even though it is actually the bird. And he goes to Sedna, who's the young daughter of the chief, who has many brothers and many suitors, but she's her own self and doesn't want to marry off, and she wants to stay with her parents. But she falls for this petrel in the guise of a human who says, I will take you to my home, which is heated, it has fur bed, and we always have meat, and everybody's happy together. And so she gets taken on his back and flies up to the rocky island where he lives, thinking that he's still a man. And so then one day the bird drops his glasses and suddenly becomes a bird to her again. She says, what have I done? I've ended up living with a bird. And meanwhile, her villagers and brothers come out to find her, and they paddle out there, and they find her running, calling for help, and the bird trying to keep her, and they take her on the boat, and they start going out and back to the village across the sea. And the bird starts to flap its wings so badly that it starts to make a tremendous sea, and they think they're going to get all lost, and the bird wants Sedna back. So the brothers throw her into the water to lighten the boat. And so then she sinks, and she is helped up by some of the sea animals, and then she tries to grab the gunwale of the boat, and her brothers start pounding with their paddles to get rid of her, and they break off her fingers. The top fingers become seals, the middle fingers become walruses, and her thumb becomes the whales. And so then she sinks to the bottom of the sea and becomes the goddess of the sea, but she has no more hands, and she can't do anything. And therefore the shaman's job to pray to Sedna for good harvest at sea is to symbolically braid her hair and help her out, and then she will be kind to her human kin and send them animals that they can catch. So she's prayed to before every hunt. And she's still out there. And I'll leave you one last saying of the Haida people near here, who, when they go out to sea, they pray to the ocean spirit also. It says, calm the waves for me, get close to me, get close to my power. Though my heart is tired, make the sea like milk for me. Yeho, yehohola, yoho, yehohola. Thank you very much, and enjoy Alaska.